I entered the inheritance meeting in a dress ironed, until the hem frayed while my sister walked in like the city owed her an apology. Her face went pale when she saw the man in the wheelchair beside me. He was not the beggar she had mocked earlier. He was the only one who could turn her fake papers into a prison sentence. Before the doors closed, he whispered that my father had predicted every step she would take. My name is Lucy Holmes. The humidity in Charleston does not just sit on your skin. It weighs you down, heavy and suffocating, like a wet wool blanket draped over your shoulders. It was mid-July, and the air was thick enough to chew on. I stood on the sidewalk outside the house that had been my entire world for the last 6 months, feeling the sweat trickle down my spine beneath the black dress I had worn to bury my father only 2 hours ago. The fabric was stiff, cheap synthetic material I had bought on sale because every spare cent I had went into his hospice care, and now it clung to me uncomfortably. My sister, Brielle, did not seem to feel the heat. She marched up the front steps of our childhood home with the precision of a soldier, her heels clicking a sharp, aggressive rhythm against the paved walkway. She was already on her phone, barking orders to someone about asset liquidation before she even had the key in the lock. We had just left the cemetery. The dirt was fresh on his grave. The flowers were still bright, their petals unwilted by the relentless sun. But Brielle was already moving on. To her, the funeral was just a calendar event, a box to be checked off so she could get to the real business of the day. "Come inside. Lucy," she said. Though it was not an invitation, it was a command. "We need to talk about the estate before the lawyers get involved tomorrow." I followed her inside. The house still smelled like him. It was a mix of old paper, cedar wood, and the faint, antiseptic scent of the medical supplies that had cluttered the living room for the past half-year. I felt a lump rise in my throat, a physical ache that made it hard to swallow. I wanted to sit in his armchair. I wanted to close my eyes and pretend that the last week had been a nightmare, that I would hear his cough from the bedroom and rush in to help him with his water. But Brielle did not give me time to grieve. She did not look at the empty armchair. She did not pause to touch the books on the shelf he loved. She went straight for the mahogany desk in the corner, the one place he had always kept private. She pulled the drawers open with a violence that made me flinch. It was a ransacking. She was hunting. I stood by the doorway, my hands trembling slightly. "Brielle, can we not do this today?" I asked, my voice sounding thin and exhausted. "We just put him in the ground." She did not look up. "Sentimentality is expensive, Lucy, and right now, this estate is bleeding." She tossed a stack of papers onto the coffee table. They landed with a heavy thud, sliding across the polished wood. "Sit down," she said. "I need you to sign these." I walked over slowly. My legs felt like lead. I looked down at the papers. They were invoices, dozens of them, medical bills, funeral expenses, outstanding utility costs. The numbers were staggering. $50,000 here, $20,000 there. "What is this?" I asked. Brielle finally looked at me. Her eyes were dry. There was no redness, no puffiness. She looked perfect, her makeup flawless, her designer suit unwrinkled. "It is the reality of dying," she said coldly. "Dad was drowning in debt. Lucy, the liquid assets are almost non-existent. These are the immediate liabilities. I am willing to cover them from my personal accounts to save the estate from bankruptcy, to keep the house from being seized immediately. But I need you to sign over the administration rights. It is a waiver. It allows me to handle the debts without dragging you into court for insolvency." She pulled a pen from her purse and clicked it. "Sign it," she said. "Do it for Dad. You do not want his legacy to be a foreclosure auction." "Do you—" I reached for the papers, my instincts warring with my grief. Brielle was the successful one. She was the one with the MBA, the one who worked in high finance in New York, the one who sent checks but never visited. I was just Lucy, Lucy the restoration artist, Lucy who spent her days in a dusty studio fixing old chairs and tapestries, Lucy, who barely made enough to cover her own rent, let alone a mountain of medical debt. But as I looked closer at the top invoice, something caught my eye. It was a bill from a specialist at St. Jude's Medical Center for Respiratory Therapy. Dated March 15th, the sum was $4,000. I frowned. I held the paper up to the light. "This is wrong," I said. Brielle sighed. An impatient, sharp sound. "Do not pretend you understand medical billing codes. Lucy, just sign the damn paper." "No," I said, my voice gaining a fraction of strength. "I mean, the date is wrong. Dad was not at St. Jude's on March 15th. That was the week he had the infection. We were at home. I did the respiratory therapy myself because the insurance would not cover the transport. I remember because I stayed up for 48 hours straight monitoring his oxygen levels." I looked at the next paper. It was a funeral home expense for a casket upgrade. $8,000. "We did not upgrade the casket," I said, looking up at her. "We picked the standard pine. You said it was all the estate could afford. Why is this invoice for a mahogany finish?" Brielle snatched the papers from my hand. Her movement was so fast it startled me. "You are being paranoid," she snapped. "These are projected costs. Estimates. I am trying to protect you. You ungrateful little brat." "Protect me?" I asked. I looked at her. Really looked at her. And for the first time, I saw the cracks in her composure. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were darting slightly. She was not grieving. She was panicking. "You are trying to get me to sign away my rights to the estate before the will is even read," I said slowly, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "You want me to admit the estate is insolvent so you can buy it out for pennies on the dollar?" Brielle let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. She threw the papers back onto the desk and crossed her arms. "The estate." She sneered. "What estate? Lucy, this house is falling apart. The investments are stagnant. And you are a 34-year-old woman who plays with glue and fabric for a living. You have been living here rent-free for 6 months, eating his food, using his utilities. You are not an heir. You are a squatter." The words stung, but they also woke me up. The grief that had been clouding my mind began to clear, replaced by a cold, hard anger. "I lived here because he was dying," I said quietly. "I lived here because he could not walk to the bathroom by himself. I lived here because someone had to change his sheets and spoon-feed him soup and hold him when he woke up screaming in pain." I took a step toward her. "Where were you?" "Brielle," I asked. "When he called your name in the middle of the night, where were you?" "Oh, that is right. You were in the Hamptons. You were too busy closing a deal to answer your phone." Brielle's face hardened. The mask of the concerned sister vanished completely. "I was working," she hissed. "I was making the money that paid for the morphine you were so happy to drug him with. I was building a future. I was not wasting my life wiping an old man's chin." The silence that followed that sentence was deafening. She realized what she had said the moment it left her lips. But she did not take it back. She did not apologize. She just stared at me with pure, unfiltered contempt. "Get out," she said. I blinked. "What?" I said. "Get out." She walked over to the front door and opened it. The heat from outside rushed in, clashing with the air-conditioned cool of the hallway. "You have no right," I said. "This is Dad's house. It is the estate's house," she corrected. "And as the executor named in the will, I am securing the property. You have shown you are unstable. You are delusional about the finances. I cannot trust you not to steal things to pay for your little craft projects." She turned and walked into the guest room, my room, the room I had stayed in since January. I followed her, panic rising in my chest. "Brielle, stop. You cannot do this." She ignored me. She grabbed my suitcase from the closet. It was already half-packed from when I thought I might go back to my apartment for a weekend that never came because he got worse. She opened the drawers of the dresser. She grabbed armfuls of my clothes, my jeans, my t-shirts, my underwear, and shoved them into the suitcase. She did not fold them. She balled them up and jammed them in. She was not touching anything else. She did not touch the picture of Dad and me on the nightstand. She did not touch the lamp. She was surgically removing only the traces of me. "Brielle, stop it," I shouted, grabbing her arm. She spun around and shoved me back. She was stronger than she looked. I stumbled and hit the door frame. I am doing you a favor. She spat. I am saving you the embarrassment of the sheriff throwing you out. The will is clear. Lucy, everything goes to the productive member of this family. Dad knew you would just squander it. He knew you needed tough love. She zipped the suitcase shut with a vicious yank. She dragged it into the hallway and threw it toward the open front door. It skidded across the floor and tipped over. She marched back to me, grabbed her purse, and pulled out a key ring. Give me your key, she said. I stared at her. I could not breathe. This was the woman I used to look up to. This was my big sister. No, I whispered. She stepped forward and snatched the lanyard hanging from my neck. It snapped. The plastic dug into my skin, leaving a red welt. But she did not care. She held the key up, her eyes triumphant. You are trespassing, she said. She grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the door. I was too shocked to fight back. I was 34 years old, and I was being dragged out of my father's house like a misbehaving child. She shoved me onto the porch. The heat hit me instantly. The sky had turned a dark, bruised purple. A summer storm was breaking. Rain began to fall, heavy, fat drops that splattered against the concrete. The meeting is tomorrow at 9 at Ashford and Klein, she said, her voice fighting against the rising sound of the wind. Try to look presentable, though I doubt it will help. She slammed the door. The sound echoed in my bones. I stood there, staring at the wood grain, the brass knocker I had polished just last week. The lock clicked, then the deadbolt slid home. I was alone. The rain began to pour in earnest. It soaked through my thin black dress in seconds. My hair plastered to my skull. My makeup, what little I had worn, began to run into my eyes. I walked over to my suitcase. It was lying on its side in a puddle. I grabbed the handle and pulled it upright. It felt heavy, filled with the wreckage of my life. I dragged it down the steps. The wheels clattered loudly on the pavement. I walked toward the street, my vision blurred by rain and tears I refused to let fall. I would not cry for her. I would not give her that satisfaction. I reached the sidewalk and stopped. I had nowhere to go. My apartment lease had ended 2 months ago. I had let it go to save money while I stayed with Dad. I had my workshop, my studio, but it was not zoned for residential use. It had a concrete floor and no shower, but it was a roof. I began to walk, the wheels of the suitcase struggling against the uneven Charleston brick. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I stopped and pulled it out, shielding the screen from the rain with my hand. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, then swiped to answer. Hello, I said, my voice shaking. Ms. Holmes? A man's voice asked. It was smooth, professional, and utterly devoid of warmth. Yes, I said. This is Calder Rourke, representing your sister, Betrayal Holmes. I froze. The rain hammered against my back. I am calling to confirm your attendance at the reading of the will and the asset distribution meeting tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, he said. I will be there, I stammered. Good, he said. We have prepared the necessary documents to formalize the transfer of assets and to finalize the renunciation of your claim. It should be a short meeting. Your sister wants this handled cleanly. He did not wait for a response. See you tomorrow. Ms. Holmes? The line went dead. I lowered the phone. The screen went black. I looked up at the house one last time. The lights were on in the living room. I could see Brielle's silhouette moving past the window. She was probably pouring herself a drink. She was probably celebrating. She thought she had won. She thought she had stripped me of everything. I gripped the handle of my suitcase tighter. The rain was cold, but the fire in my chest was hot. I turned my back on the house and started walking into the storm. I had 12 hours until the meeting. I had 12 hours to figure out how to survive. I did not know it then, but the war had just begun. Harbor Loom Restoration Studio was not designed for sleeping. It was a converted warehouse space in the industrial district, a high-ceilinged concrete box that smelled perpetually of sawdust, linseed oil, and harsh chemical strippers. I had spent the night on a pile of quilted moving blankets spread out on the concrete floor, using a rolled-up drop cloth as a pillow. My back throbbed in a dull, persistent rhythm that matched the headache pulsing behind my eyes. The sun was barely up, filtering through the grime-streaked high windows in dusty gray beams. I sat up and rubbed my face, my hands feeling rough and dry. The silence here was different from the silence in my father's house. There, the silence had been heavy with the absence of his breathing. Here, the silence was mechanical. It was the sound of distant traffic, the hum of the industrial refrigerator in the break corner, and the settling of old pipes. I stood up and stretched, my joints popping. I walked over to the utility sink in the corner to splash cold water on my face. The mirror above the sink was cracked, a jagged line running right through my reflection. I looked tired. Dark circles bruised the skin under my eyes, and my hair was a tangled mess from the humidity and the restless sleep. I could not look like this. Not today. I went to the rack where I kept the few clothes I left at the studio for emergencies. I pulled out my one good dress. It was a navy blue sheath dress I had bought 5 years ago for a gallery opening. It was simple, professional, and unfortunately, wrinkled from hanging too close to the damp brick wall. I set up the ironing board on my main work table, pushing aside jars of wood stain and half-stripped chair legs. The iron was an old industrial model, heavy and prone to sputtering. I plugged it in and waited for the light to turn orange. As I pressed the hot metal against the fabric, steam hissed violently, rising up to cloud my vision. I focused entirely on the movement. Slide, lift, press, slide, lift, press. It was a meditative act. If I could smooth out these wrinkles, maybe I could smooth out the chaos of the last 24 hours. At least I will walk in there like a human being, I whispered to myself. The rolling metal shutter at the front of the studio rattled loudly, making me jump. I nearly burned a hole in the dress. Lucy. Open up. It is me. It was Maya. I hurried over to the side door and unlocked it. Maya Rowe breezed in, bringing with her a gust of morning heat and the rich, salvation scent of strong coffee. She was carrying a cardboard tray with 2 large cups and a white paper bag that was already spotting with grease. You look like you slept in a construction zone, Maya said, handing me a coffee without a hello. I did, I said, taking a long sip. The caffeine hit my system like a jolt of electricity. Thanks, Maya. She hopped up onto a sturdy workbench, her legs swinging. She was dressed in her nurse's scrubs, having likely come straight from her overnight shift. Maya had been there for me through everything: the diagnosis, the hospice care, the late nights. She knew the truth of what had happened in that house better than anyone. I brought bear claws, she said, gesturing to the bag. Sugar is good for shock. I am not in shock, I said, turning back to my ironing. I am preparing for war. Maya watched me for a moment, her expression softening. She reached into her scrub pocket and pulled out her phone. Speaking of war, she said, I found something last night. Remember back in February when Betrayal came down for that one weekend? The time she spent the whole visit complaining about the smell of the medicine? I nodded. I remember. She left a day early because she said the Wi-Fi was too slow for her conference calls. Maya tapped her screen and held it up. She was texting me that weekend. Maya said, she probably thought because I was just the hired help's friend, I would be on her side, or maybe she was just drunk. Look at this. I leaned in to read the screenshot. It was dated February 12th. The old man is fading fast. Finally, I have the paperwork ready to kick the sister to the curb the second the heart monitor flatlines. She thinks she is getting the house. Hilarious. I stared at the words. The cruelty was so casual. It was not just greed. It was malice. She had been planning my eviction while I was learning how to administer morphine. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. She told me yesterday she was doing it to save the estate from debt. She said it was a business decision. Maya snorted. She is rich. Lucy. But she does not have the truth. This proves premeditation. It proves she never intended to act in good faith as an executor. She was plotting against a beneficiary before the testator was even dead. Can I use this? I asked. Maya forwarded the image to me. Keep it. If she tries to play the grieving, overwhelmed daughter, you pull this out. It shows character. And in probate court, character counts. I finished ironing the dress and hung it carefully on a hook. I needed to look through the papers I had managed to salvage. When Brielle had thrown me out, I had managed to grab my backpack, which contained a specific accordion folder of Dad's personal files I had been organizing for him. I sat down on the floor with the folder. Maya slid off the bench and sat cross-legged opposite me. "What are you looking for?" she asked. "I do not know." I admitted. "A loophole. A miracle. Brielle said there is no money." She showed me invoices, but Dad was meticulous. He kept a ledger for everything. I flipped through the bank statements from the last year. The numbers were depressing. The balance had dwindled steadily as the medical costs ramped up. Brielle was right about one thing: the liquid cash was gone. But then I saw it. On a statement from November, there was a recurring withdrawal of $250. The recipient was listed simply as Ashford Trust Services. I pointed at the line. "Look at this." Maya squinted. "What is it?" "He was paying a monthly fee to a trust service." I said, "Brielle uses the law firm Ashford and Klein. This must be connected to them. But if he had a trust, why would Brielle say there is nothing but debt? And why would he be paying a service fee if the trust was empty?" "Maybe it is a maintenance fee for the account," Maya suggested. $250 a month. I shook my head. That is high for a maintenance fee on an empty account. And look, he paid it every month for 5 years. That is $15,000 just in fees. You do not pay that kind of overhead unless you are protecting something valuable. My phone buzzed on the concrete floor. The screen lit up with a notification. New message, Brielle. I hesitated. My heart did a painful flip in my chest. "Read it," Maya said firmly. "Do not let her have the power of your fear." I picked up the phone. The message was short. "Do not show up looking like a failure. The partners at the firm do not have patience for sob stories. I will make sure you are humiliated in front of everyone if you try to make a scene." I read it out loud. My voice sounded steady, which surprised me. "She is terrified," Maya observed. I looked at her. "She does not sound terrified. She sounds like a predator. Predators only attack when they are hungry or threatened." Maya said, "She is trying to suppress you before you even walk in the door. If she was confident the law was on her side, she would not care what you wore or how you acted. She wants you small. She wants you to sign that waiver and disappear because she knows if you start digging, you might find something she does not want you to see." I looked back at the bank statement. Ashford Trust Services. "She kept saying, 'I am a leech,'" I said quietly. "That is what scares me. Maya, I do not care about the money. I can make my own money. I can live in this studio if I have to, but she wants to write it into history that I was a burden on Dad. She wants the legal record to say I drained his resources and contributed nothing." I looked up at my friend, my eyes burning. I spent 6 months holding his hand while he cried in pain. I cleaned up things no daughter should have to clean. I gave up my lease, my commissions, my life, and she wants to sign a paper that says I was a parasite. Maya reached over and grabbed my hand. Her grip was tight, grounding. "Then you do not sign," she said fiercely. "You go in there. You sit in that fancy leather chair, and you hold your pen. You let them talk. You let them threaten. But you do not put your name on anything until you understand every single word, and you record everything." She tapped her pocket. "I am sending you a voice recorder app that uploads to a cloud instantly. Even if they take your phone, the audio is saved." I nodded, taking a deep breath. "Okay, I can do that." I looked back down at the folder. I was putting the bank statement back when a small, yellow piece of paper fluttered out from between 2 insurance policies. It was an old sticky note. The adhesive had long since dried up, leaving a faint rectangular stain on the document it had been attached to. I picked it up. It was my father's handwriting, not the shaky, spider scrawl of his final months, but the strong, blocky print of his healthy years. It was just one sentence. "If Brielle is cruel, find Whitaker." I read it twice. The name meant nothing to me. "Whitaker," I asked. "Do we know a Whitaker?" Maya shook her head. "Never heard of him. Is it a doctor? A lawyer I do not know?" I said. I turned the note over. There was nothing on the back, just the name, Whitaker. I looked at the date on the insurance policy the note had been stuck to. It was dated 5 years ago. the same year the payments to Ashford Trust Services began. He knew. I whispered. He knew what he knew Brielle would do this. I ran my thumb over the ink. He wrote this years ago. If Brielle is cruel, he did not say if I die. He made a contingency plan for his own daughter's cruelty. A chill went through me that had nothing to do with the studio's drafty air. My father had loved us both. But he was not blind. He had seen something in Brielle, even back then, that I had refused to admit until yesterday. I have to find this man, I said, clutching the note. Whitaker. How Maya asked. You have a meeting in 2 hours. I stood up, the adrenaline finally overriding the exhaustion. I do not know, but if Dad left this note, he left it for a reason. And if Brielle is trying this hard to silence me, maybe Whitaker is the voice she is afraid of. I walked over to the dress hanging on the hook. It looked lonely against the industrial backdrop, a ghost of a formal life I rarely lived. I pulled the dress down. I'm going to get dressed, I said. Then I'm going to the library on the way to the firm. I need to look up every Whitaker associated with Ashford and Klein. Maya stood up and brushed the crumbs from her scrubs. I have to get back to the hospital for the morning rounds. But text me every 30 minutes. If you go silent, I am calling the police and reporting a kidnapping. I managed a weak smile. She is a corporate shark. Maya, not a cartel boss. Same difference. Maya said, walking to the door. Good luck. Lucy, give them hell. She left. The metal shutter rattling down behind her. I was alone again. I held the yellow note in my hand for a moment longer. Find Whitaker. It felt like a quest item in a video game. A small, fragile key to a door I could not yet see. I dressed quickly. The navy dress fit a little looser than I remembered. Stress had eaten away my appetite over the last few weeks. I put on my heels, the sound echoing sharply on the concrete. I packed the folder, the bank statements, and the yellow note into my tote bag. I looked at myself in the cracked mirror one last time. You are not a leech. I told my reflection, you are his daughter. I walked out of the studio into the morning heat. The air was heavy with the threat of more rain. I had a name, a screenshot, and a broken heart. It was not much of an arsenal, but it would have to be enough. I checked the time. 7:30 in the morning. I had 90 minutes to find a ghost named Whitaker before I walked into the lion's den. The morning air outside the studio was not just hot. It was angry. The humidity in Charleston usually felt like a warm embrace, but today it felt like a chokehold. I had left the studio with plenty of time to spare. My navy dress pressed, my hair pinned back in a tight, professional bun, and my father's accordion folder tucked safely under my arm. I was determined to arrive at Ashford and Klein Legal Group 10 minutes early, calm and collected, defying the chaotic, insolvent image Brielle was so desperate to paint of me. I walked briskly to the subway station on King Street, my heels clicking a steady, confident rhythm on the pavement. I checked my watch. It was 8:15 in the morning. I had 45 minutes to cover a distance that usually took 20 minutes by train. I was going to make it, but the universe, it seemed, had aligned itself with my sister. As I swiped my pass at the turnstile, a collective groan went up from the platform below. I froze. The digital display boards that usually flashed arrival times were dead black. A crackly, distorted voice came over the intercom, announcing a citywide power surge that had tripped the signaling system. All trains were grounded until further notice. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. I turned and ran back up the stairs, my phone already in my hand. I opened my rideshare app. The surge pricing was astronomical, but I did not care. I hit confirm. No cars available. I tried another app, searching for drivers. The little wheel spun and spun, mocking me. The streets were gridlocked. The traffic lights were out due to the same surge, and the intersection outside the station was a snarl of honking horns and bumper-to-bumper steel. No one was moving. I looked at my watch again. 8:22. I had 38 minutes to get to the financial district. It was nearly 2 miles away. I have to run, I said aloud. I tightened my grip on the folder and took off. The first 5 blocks were manageable. The adrenaline fueled me. pushing me past the initial shock of the heat. But by block 8, the reality of running in heels through a Charleston summer set in. The sweat began to prickle at my hairline, threatening the integrity of my carefully styled bun. My dress, the one I had ironed with almost religious devotion that morning, began to cling to my lower back. I dodged pedestrians who were meandering slowly, oblivious to my desperation. I wove through stalled cars, ignoring the shouts of drivers who were just as frustrated as I was. Every step sent a jolt of pain up my calves. My feet were slipping slightly inside my shoes. I could hear Brielle's voice in my head, clear and venomous. "Look at you, Lucy, a mess. You cannot even manage a simple commute. How do you expect to manage an estate?" I gritted my teeth. I would not let her win. I would run until my lungs burned, and I would walk into that boardroom and stare her down, even if I was dripping sweat. I turned the corner onto a side street that I knew was a shortcut to the legal district. It was usually a quiet, tree-lined avenue, but today it was a disaster zone. Orange construction barrels blocked the sidewalk. Yellow caution tape fluttered lazily in the stagnant air. A sign read, "Sidewalk closed, infrastructure repair." I stopped, my chest heaving. I could not go back. Retracing my steps would add 10 minutes I did not have. I looked at the road. The asphalt had been torn up, revealing the red clay earth beneath. A makeshift walkway of plywood planks had been laid down over a deep, muddy trench where the workers were replacing sewage pipes. It was narrow, treacherous, and slick with the mud from last night's storm. I can do this, I told myself. Just walk carefully. I stepped onto the first plank. It wobbled under my weight. Below me, the trench was about 3 feet deep, a gash of wet earth and exposed rebar. I focused on my feet, taking small, measured steps. The sounds of the city seemed to fade, replaced by the thudding of my own heart and the squelch of mud beneath the wood. I was halfway across when I saw him. Ahead of me, where the planks widened slightly to allow for a turn, an elderly man in a wheelchair was stuck. He was not moving. The left wheel of his chair had slipped off the edge of the plywood and was wedged deep into the soft, unforgiving mud of the trench edge. He was leaning precariously to the right, trying to counterbalance the tilt, but every time he moved, the chair slid another inch toward the open pit. He was dressed in a gray suit that looked 2 sizes too big for his frail frame. His white hair was thin, wispy in the wind. His hands, spotted with age, were gripping the wheels, his knuckles white with strain. He was pushing, pulling, trying to rock the chair free, but he did not have the strength. I watched as a businessman in a sharp blue suit walked right past him. The man looked at the wheelchair, then looked at his phone, and stepped around the scene as if the old man were nothing more than a traffic cone. A woman with a stroller followed, maneuvering her baby expertly around the stuck wheel without even making eye contact. The old man let out a sharp, wheezing breath. His arms shook. The chair groaned, the metal frame tilting further. If he slipped another few inches, the whole thing would tip over, spilling him into the construction trench full of jagged rocks and rebar. I checked my watch. 8:45. If I stopped, I would be late. If I was late, Brielle would use it as ammunition to prove I was irresponsible. She would have the lawyers lock the doors. She would sign the papers. I would lose the house. I would lose my father's legacy. I took a step forward, intending to squeeze past. Just keep walking. A dark voice in my head whispered, "Someone else will help him. You have to save yourself." The old man looked up. His eyes met mine. They were not pleading. They were resigned. He looked like a man who was used to being invisible. He looked like my father did in those last weeks when he could not feed himself proud, but trapped in a body that ultimately betrayed him. The image of my father, helpless in his bed, superimposed itself over this stranger. I swore under my breath. I stopped. I turned back. I dropped my tote bag onto the muddy planks, the folder, the evidence, the bank statements. The only leverage I had sat there, vulnerable to the damp. I kicked off my heels. I could not get leverage in them. I stepped into the mud in my stocking feet. The cold slime oozed between my toes, ruining my pantyhose instantly. I lunged for the wheelchair just as it gave another ominous lurch. I grabbed the handle and the frame, digging my feet into the wood. "Hold on," I shouted. "Do not move." The old man froze. "I am slipping," he gasped, his voice raspy and thin. "I know," I said, gritting my teeth. "I have got you." I planted my feet wider. I was not a big woman, but 6 months of lifting my father, of turning him in bed so he would not get sores, had given me a hidden reserve of core strength. I gripped the muddy wheel rim with my bare hands. On the count of 3, "I'm going to pull back," I said. You leaned forward. 1, 2, 3. I pulled with everything I had. My shoulder muscles burned, the mud sucked at the wheel. Refusing to let go, I slipped, my knee hitting the dirty plywood with a hard crack, but I did not let go. I groaned with the effort, feeling the sweat pour down my back. With a wet, sucking sound, the wheel popped free. I yanked the chair back onto the center of the planks, stumbling backward as the weight shifted. I barely caught myself before I fell. We stood there for a moment, breathing hard in the humid air. My hands were covered in red clay. My dress had a smear of mud across the hip where I had braced against the chair. My feet were ruined. My hair had come loose, strands sticking to my wet face. I was a mess, a complete and utter disaster. "Are you all right?" I asked, panting. The old man adjusted his jacket. He took a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his forehead, his hands trembling slightly. He looked at me, really looked at me, with a piercing intensity that felt out of place for a stranger in distress. "You are late," he said. I blinked, surprised by the observation. I looked at my watch. 8:52? "Yes," I said, picking up my heels and my bag. "I am very late." "Then why did you stop?" he asked. His voice was steady now, the rasp gone. "3 people walked past me before you came. They had places to be. You clearly have somewhere urgent to be. You ruined your dress." I looked down at the mud on my skirt. I tried to brush it off, but it only smeared into the fabric. I let out a short, dry laugh. "It does not matter," I said. "It does matter," he insisted. "Why did you stop?" I looked at him. I thought of the empty chair in my living room. I thought of the note in my bag. "My father," I said, my voice catching slightly. He used to tell me that there are many important appointments in life, business meetings, dates, deadlines, but he said none of them are as important as the appointment you have with your own conscience. He said you never walk away from someone who has fallen, not if you want to be able to look at yourself in the mirror the next day. The old man stared at me. His eyes were a startlingly pale blue, sharp and intelligent. He did not smile, but the lines around his eyes deepened. "Your father sounds like a rare man," he said. "He was." I said, "I have to go. I am sorry. Can you make it to the end of the block? I can manage from here," he said. I nodded and turned to run. I jammed my muddy feet back into my heels, wincing at the grit. "Wait," the man called out. I turned back, impatient now. "I really have to go. Allow me to introduce myself," he said. He sat up a little straighter in his chair. The frailty seemed to evaporate, replaced by a strange, quiet dignity. "My name is Elias Whitaker." I froze. The world seemed to stop spinning, the sounds of the construction, the distant traffic, the thudding of my heart, it all went silent. "Whitaker," I repeated. I dropped my bag again. I fumbled for the folder, my muddy fingers shaking as I pulled out the yellow sticky note. "If Betrayal is cruel, find Whitaker." I looked at the note. I looked at the man. "Elias Whitaker." I whispered. He watched me, his expression unreadable. He glanced at the folder in my hand, then at the dirty hem of my dress, and finally at my face. "Tell me, young lady," he said softly. "You are running toward the financial district. You are dressed for a battle, though you now look like you have been through a war." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial volume that sent a shiver down my spine despite the heat. "You are also going to the inheritance meeting at Ashford and Klein, aren't you?" The bus arrived like a hulking metal beast, screeching to a halt beside the temporary construction barrier. It was already over capacity. the windows fogged with the collective breath of frustrated commuters who had been forced above ground by the subway failure. The doors hissed open, and the driver, a man with a sheen of sweat on his forehead and zero patience in his eyes, glared at us. I looked at Elias Whitaker. I looked at the ramp mechanism that was slowly, agonizingly extending from the bus door. "We are getting on," I said, more to myself than to him. The ramp hit the curb with a metallic clang. I grabbed the handles of his wheelchair. My arms were still trembling from the effort of pulling him out of the mud, and my dress was a disaster of red clay smears and wrinkles. But I did not care. The only thing that mattered was moving forward. I pushed him up the incline. It was steep. Inside, the bus was a wall of bodies. People looked down at us with undisguised irritation. A businessman in a crisp gray suit actually checked his watch and sighed loudly as I maneuvered the chair into the designated bay. "Move back," the driver shouted over his shoulder. "Let them in." No one wanted to move. They were packed shoulder to shoulder, radiating heat and annoyance. I had to physically use my own body as a wedge, turning my back to the crowd and pressing outward to create a protective bubble around Mr. Whitaker. I locked the wheels of his chair, but the bus lurched forward before I could grab the overhead strap. I stumbled, my hips slamming into the metal railing. The bus driver was aggressive, accelerating and braking in violent bursts as he fought the gridlock. Every time he slammed on the brakes, the inertia threatened to send the wheelchair sliding despite the locks. I planted my feet, my ruined, muddy feet, and braced my hands against the back of his chair and the partition wall. I became a human shock absorber. A woman with a large tote bag tutted at me, brushing imaginary dust off her arm where I had accidentally brushed against her. She looked at my muddy hem and wrinkled nose. "Some people have no consideration for public hygiene," she muttered to her companion. I bit my tongue. I stared straight ahead. My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. I could feel the shame burning my cheeks, hot and prickly. I was Lucy Holmes, the restoration artist. I was the daughter of a man who taught me dignity. But right now, to these people, I was just a dirty, chaotic obstacle making their commute worse. "Ignore them," a voice said. I looked down. Mr. Whitaker was not looking at the woman. He was looking at his hands, which were resting calmly in his lap. He had wiped the mud from them with his handkerchief, and despite his frayed collar and the worn elbows of his jacket, he possessed a stillness that the frantic commuters around us lacked. "I am fine," I lied. He turned his head slightly, angling it so he could speak to me without shouting. Though the roar of the engine was loud, "I spent 40 years in estate governance and probate administration," he said. His voice was conversational, as if we were sitting in a quiet park and not trapped in a rolling sauna. I blinked, surprised by the sudden disclosure. "You were a lawyer, not a lawyer," he corrected. "Lawyers argue the law. I administered the intent. I was the neutral party, the executor for families who did not trust each other. I have sat in more inheritance meetings than I can count. I have seen billionaires fight over a $10 ceramic cat because their mother loved it. And I have seen children sell their parents' legacy for a sports car before the body was even cold." The bus hit a pothole. I gripped the rail harder, my knuckles turning white. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. He looked up at me then. His blue eyes were frighteningly clear. "Because I know the look on your face, Miss Holmes. I have seen it 1,000 times. It is the look of the one who stayed." The air in the bus seemed to vanish. I stared at him. "The one who stayed," I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. He nodded slowly. "In every family, when the end comes, there is usually a division of labor. There is the child who leaves to conquer the world, to make money, to build a reputation. They send checks. They visit on holidays. They call for 10 minutes on Sundays. And then there is the child who stays. The one who drives to the chemotherapy appointments. The one who learns how to change a colostomy bag. The one who sleeps in a chair next to the hospital bed because the patient is afraid to be alone in the dark." My throat tightened. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. Sudden and hot. He was describing my last 6 months with terrifying accuracy. "The world rewards the one who leaves," Whitaker continued, his gaze drifting to the window where the city blurred past in streaks of gray and brick. They have the shiny career. They have the clean hands, the one who stays. They just have the exhaustion. They have the trauma of the slow decline. He paused, and his next words felt like he had reached into my chest and squeezed my heart. And then, at the reading of the will, the one who left always says the same thing about the one who stayed. They call them a leech. They say, "You lived here rent-free. You lived off his money while I was working." They twist the sacrifice into a debt. I gasped. It was a small, broken sound that was lost in the noise of the bus. But Whitaker heard it. "How?" I stammered. "How do you know that? How do you know she called me that? I did not say she called you that." Whitaker said softly. "I said that is what always happens. Grief makes people ugly, Miss Holmes, but greed makes them monsters. The sibling who was absent feels guilty. Deep down, they know they failed their duty, so they have to villainize the one who was present. If you are a leech, then their abandonment is justified. If you are a bad person, then they are the righteous savior coming to rescue the estate. It is a narrative they invent to sleep at night." I looked at the back of his head, at the thin white hair. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. He was not just guessing, he was reciting. It was as if he had read the transcript of my argument with Betrayal yesterday. I remembered the note in my bag. "If Betrayal is cruel, find Whitaker. My father knew this man. He must have. But in what capacity?" My father was a man of modest means, a retired history teacher who collected rare books. He did not move in circles that required estate governance specialists. "We are almost at the financial district," I said, checking the street signs. "We are going to Ashford and Klein. Do you know the firm, Mr. Whitaker's expression changed. It was subtle, a slight tightening of the muscles around his mouth, a shadowing of his eyes. "I know them," he said. "My sister hired a partner there." I said, "His name is Calder Rourke. He called me yesterday." He sounded eager. At the mention of the name Rourke, Whitaker's hands clenched into fists on his lap. It was a spasm of pure, controlled anger. For a second, the frail old man in the wheelchair looked dangerous. He looked like a retired general hearing the name of a traitor. "Calder Rourke," he said, testing the name on his tongue like a piece of spoiled meat. "He is a man who believes the law is a tool for the highest bidder, not a shield for the truth." He looked up at me. "Listen to me. Lucy." He used my first name. It sounded authoritative, like a command. "When we walk into that lobby, you will be judged. They will look at your muddy dress. They will look at your hair. They will look at the sweat on your face. Rourke will try to make you feel small. He will use legal jargon designed to confuse you. He will try to make you angry." He leaned in closer. "Do not give him your anger. That is what he wants. If you scream, you are the unstable daughter. If you cry, you are the weak female. You must be ice. You must be stone. Let them talk. Let them lay out every single lie. Let them put the noose around their own necks. But I have to defend myself." I protested. "They have papers. Betrayal said she has invoices. She's going to sign a waiver for me. Let her produce the papers." Whitaker said, "Let her put them on the table." He patted the breast pocket of his oversized jacket. I heard the crinkle of paper and the clink of something metal. "Some wills have clauses that the standard lawyers do not look for," he said enigmatically. "Morality clauses. Provisions that trigger only under specific conditions of betrayal. Your father was a historian. Lucy, he understood that history is not written by the victors. It is written by the survivors, and he wanted you to survive." The bus screeched to a halt. The hydraulic doors hissed open. We were here. The towering glass facade of the Ashford and Klein building loomed above us, reflecting the gray, stormy sky. I maneuvered him toward the exit. The crowd parted reluctantly. I backed down the ramp, carefully guiding the chair until his wheels touched the sidewalk. The humidity hit us again. But I barely felt it. My mind was racing with his words. Morality clauses. Provisions. I looked at him. He sat there in his wheelchair, looking small and battered against the backdrop of the massive skyscrapers. But there was a fire in him now. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. "You do not even know me." He looked at the revolving doors of the law firm. I am not helping you because I know you. Lucy, he said, I am helping you because I knew your father, and because I have a very low tolerance for bullies. He gestured toward the entrance. Shall we? He asked. I took a deep breath. I smoothed my muddy dress as best I could. I lifted my chin. Yes, I said. I began to push him toward the entrance. As we approached the automatic doors, he spoke one last time. His voice so low I almost missed it over the sound of the city traffic. It was a promise, a dark, heavy promise. If they bring fake papers to this table, he whispered, someone is going to leave this room in disgrace today, and it will not be you. The doors slid open, a blast of freezing, sterile air hit us. We stepped out of the heat and into the arena. The lobby of Ashford and Klein Legal Group was designed to make you feel small. We stepped out of the suffocating Charleston heat and into a climate-controlled cathedral of glass and steel. The air conditioning was set to a temperature that felt less like comfort and more like a preservation technique for dead things. The floors were polished white marble, so reflective that I could see the muddy disaster of my own reflection staring back at me with every step. The walls were lined with abstract art that looked like it cost more than my father's entire house. And the reception desk was a fortress of black granite manned by two women who looked like they had been genetically engineered to never smile. The silence was aggressive. It was the kind of quiet that demanded you apologize for breathing. I pushed Elias Whitaker toward a sleek leather bench near a potted fern that looked like it was dusted daily. The wheels of his chair squeaked against the marble, a high-pitched sound that made heads turn. Men in $1,000 suits and women in sharp pencil skirts glanced at us, their eyes lingering on the red clay mud smeared on my dress and the elderly man in the oversized jacket. They did not look with sympathy. They looked with the polite, distant disgust one reserves for a stain on a tablecloth. I parked the chair and locked the wheels. Mr. Whitaker looked pale. The exertion of the morning and the heat of the bus ride had taken a toll on him. His lips were dry, and his breathing was a little shallow. I need water. I said, stay here. I walked over to a vending machine tucked discreetly in an alcove, hidden away as if the firm was ashamed to admit that even lawyers needed to hydrate. I dug into my purse. I had exactly $5 in cash left. My credit cards were maxed out from the funeral costs, and my checking account was currently overdrawn by $40 because of an automatic bill payment I had forgotten to cancel. The water was $3.50. I stared at the price. It was robbery. But I looked back at Mr. Whitaker, slumping slightly in his chair, wiping his forehead with that dirty handkerchief. I fed the bills into the machine. 1, 2, 3, 4 singles. The machine whirred and spat out a bottle of spring water. I took the 50 cents in change 2 quarters and held them tight in my palm. This was it. This was my net worth. I walked back to him and cracked the seal. Here, I said, handing him the bottle. Drink. He took it with a shaking hand. Thank you. Lucy, he said softly, while he drank. I noticed a smear of red mud on the sleeve of his gray jacket. It must have happened when I grabbed him to pull him from the trench. It looked stark and ugly against the fabric. I cannot let you go in there looking like this, I murmured. I pulled a tissue from my bag, dampened it with the condensation from the water bottle, and knelt beside his chair. I started to dab at the mud on his cuff. It was a futile gesture. Really, we both looked like wrecks, but it was about dignity. If they were going to judge us, I wanted them to judge us on our faces, not our dirt. Leave it, Lucy, Whitaker said, lowering the bottle. It does not matter. It matters to me, I said, scrubbing gently. You deserve to be respected. You are a human being, not just some guy I found on the street. Well, isn't this a touching scene? The voice cut through the air like a serrated knife. I froze. My hand hovered over Whitaker's sleeve. I knew that voice. I knew the cadence, the pitch, and the absolute lack of warmth. I slowly stood up and turned around. Brielle was standing 10 feet away, in the center of the lobby, posing as if she were waiting for a photographer to capture her good side. She looked immaculate. She was wearing a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my car. Her blonde hair was blown out to perfection, not a single strand out of place despite the humidity outside. She wore towering nude heels that elongated her legs, and as she stepped closer, the scent of her perfume, a heavy, floral musk, hit me like a physical wave. It was the smell of money. It was the smell of someone who had never had to scrub a toilet or change a bedpan in her life. She looked me up and down, her lip curling in a sneer of pure amusement. "Look at you," she said, shaking her head. "I told you to look presentable. Lucy, did you crawl here through the sewers?" I straightened my back, trying to shield Mr. Whitaker with my body. There were no cabs. "Brielle," I said, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. "The subway is down." "I had to run," she laughed. It was a light, tinkling sound that echoed off the marble walls. "Of course you did," she said. "Everything is always a struggle for you, isn't it? You love the drama of the struggle. It makes you feel like a martyr." Her eyes shifted past me and landed on Mr. Whitaker. Her expression went from amusement to open disgust. "And who is this?" she asked, gesturing with a manicured hand. "Did you bring a prop?" "He is a friend," I said quickly. "A friend." Brielle stepped closer, peering at Whitaker. "He looks like a beggar you picked up on the corner. What is the matter? Lucy, were you afraid to face me alone, so you found a stray to drag along for moral support? Or are you trying to prove to the lawyers how charitable you are? Look at me. I save old people. Give me the inheritance." She turned to the man standing beside her. I had been so focused on Brielle I had not fully registered him. It was Calder Rourke. He was tall, handsome in a generic, television lawyer sort of way, with slicked-back dark hair and a suit that was tailored within an inch of its life. He held a leather portfolio under his arm and looked at me with a mixture of pity and boredom. "This is your sister Rourke?" asked Brielle. "Unfortunately." Brielle sighed. She looked back at me, her eyes hard. "Get rid of him." "Lucy?" "No," I said. "He is coming with me." Brielle laughed again, harsher this time. "Into the meeting? Are you insane? This is a private legal matter, not a soup kitchen. We are discussing assets, stocks, bonds, things this man clearly has not seen in decades, if ever. Look at his shoes. They are falling apart." She reached out and snatched the water bottle from Mr. Whitaker's hand. He did not resist. He just watched her, his blue eyes unblinking. Brielle looked at the bottle. "You bought him water?" she asked, looking at me. "With whose money?" "Dad's estate money." "You are spending my inheritance on hydration for the homeless. Now I paid for it myself," I said, my anger rising. "Give it back to him." Brielle smiled. It was a cold, cruel smile that did not reach her eyes. "You have a sickness. Lucy," she said softly. "You are addicted to being the saint. You need broken things around you so you can feel superior. That is why you stayed with Dad. That is why you picked up this trash." She tipped the bottle. I watched in horror as she poured the water out. She did not pour it on the floor. She poured it directly onto my shoes. The cold water soaked through the leather of my heels instantly. It splashed onto my ankles, mixing with the mud, creating a dirty puddle around my feet. "Oops," she said, dropping the empty plastic bottle onto Mr. Whitaker's lap. My hand slipped. The lobby went silent. People were watching now. The receptionists had stopped typing. A courier by the door had paused. I stood there, feeling the water seep into my socks. I was shaking, not from cold, but from a rage so pure and hot it felt like it was going to burn through my skin. I wanted to scream. I wanted to lung at her and wipe that smirk off her face. Calder Rourke stepped forward. He placed a hand on my shoulder. It was heavy, patronizing. He tapped the edge of his leather folder against my collarbone. A rhythmic, annoying tap, tap, tap. "Let us not make a scene." "Miss Holmes?" he said, his voice smooth and oily. "Your sister is under a lot of stress. You are clearly not in a state to be making decisions. Why don't you go clean yourself up in the restroom? Leave your friend here, and we can get this over with quickly." He was not asking. He was telling. The tapping of the folder felt like a hammer. "Know your place. Know your place." I clenched my fists at my sides. My fingernails dug into my palms. "Do not touch me," I whispered. Calder smiled. A tight, condescending expression. "I am just trying to help you save face. You look hysterical." I took a breath to shout, to let it all out. But a hand touched my arm. It was warm. It was dry. It was firm. I looked down. Mr. Whitaker had reached out and gripped my wrist. He was not looking at Betrayal or Calder. He was looking at me. "Steady," he said. His voice was low, barely audible, but it cut through the red haze of my anger. "Let them talk. Lucy, let them finish." His eyes were an anchor. In the middle of this storm of humiliation, he was the only thing that felt real. "Do not give them your anger," he had said on the bus. "That is what they want." I took a deep, shuddering breath. I forced my hands to unclench. I looked at Betrayal, who was waiting for me to explode. She wanted me to scream so she could point and say, "See, she is crazy. I am not going anywhere," I said, my voice shaking but loud enough to be heard. "And neither is he." Brielle's eyes narrowed. The game wasn't going how she expected. She hated it when I didn't break. "Fine," she snapped. She turned to the reception desk and waved her hand imperiously. "Security," she shouted. The two receptionists jumped. "I want this man removed," Betrayal announced, pointing a manicured finger at Mr. Whitaker. "He is soliciting. He is harassing me. I am a client of this firm, and I do not feel safe with this vagrant in the lobby." It was a lie, a blatant, ugly lie. But in a place like this, the truth did not matter. The suit mattered. The client account mattered. Two large security guards in dark uniforms materialized from the side corridor. They looked like moving walls. They saw Betrayal rich, angry, important. They saw me muddy, wet, trembling. They saw Whitaker old, frail, in a wheelchair. The math was easy for them. "Ma'am," one of the guards said, approaching Betrayal, "is there a problem? This man is bothering us," Betrayal said. Crossing her arms, "He followed my sister in here to beg for money. He is running some kind of scam. Get him out." The guard turned to Whitaker. He loomed over the wheelchair, his shadow falling across the old man's face. "Sir," the guard said, his voice deep and bored, "you need to leave. Private property." "No." I stepped between the guard and the wheelchair. "He is with me. He is a witness." The guard didn't even look at me. He looked at Calder Rourke. Rourke gave a subtle nod, confirming Betrayal's order. "Sir," the guard repeated, reaching for the handles of the wheelchair, "I am going to have to ask you to roll on out, or we will have to assist you." Betrayal smirked. She had won. She had the power, the lawyers, and now the muscle. Mr. Whitaker did not flinch. He did not pull away. He simply reached into his pocket and placed his hand over the guard's hand, stopping him from moving the chair. It was a gentle touch, but the guard froze. Mr. Whitaker looked up. For the first time, he raised his voice. It was not a shout. It was a projection. It was the voice of a man who was used to boardrooms, not street corners. "Gentlemen," Whitaker said. The guard blinked, confused by the tone. "Before you touch this chair again," Whitaker said, his diction crisp and precise, "I want you to look up." He pointed a shaking finger toward the corner of the ceiling. "There is a 360-degree security camera right there, and there is another one above the reception desk." The guard looked up. Whitaker continued, his eyes locking onto the guard's name tag. "Officer Miller, you are currently being asked to remove a disabled man who has made no threats, solicited no money, and is waiting quietly for a scheduled meeting. If you proceed to physically remove me based on the false accusation of a woman who just poured water on a guest's shoes." Whitaker paused. He looked at Betrayal, then at Rourke, and finally back to the guard. He smiled, but it was a shark smile. "Well, that would be a civil rights violation and an Americans with Disabilities Act lawsuit that would cost this firm and your security contracting company about $5 million. I know the going rate for settlement. I used to draft the checks." The lobby went deathly silent. The guard pulled his hand back as if the wheelchair was red hot. He looked at his partner. He looked at Brielle. You said he was a beggar, the guard said to Brielle, his tone accusing. He is, Brielle screeched, though her voice cracked slightly. Look at him. He is bluffing. Just throw him out. Whitaker adjusted his cuffs. Do you want to handle this in front of witnesses and cameras? Officer, he asked calmly. Or should we simply proceed to the conference room and let the lawyers figure out who belongs here? The guard stepped back. He crossed his hands behind his back. We will wait here, the guard said. If he causes trouble, call us back. But we are not dragging an old man out of a chair for sitting in a lobby. Brielle's face turned a blotchy red. She spun around to Rourke. Do something, she hissed. Rourke looked at Whitaker. His eyes were narrowed. Calculating. He was realizing, perhaps for the first time, that the old man might be more than a prop. Let it go. Brielle, Rourke muttered. We have the meeting in 5 minutes. Let them come up. We will crush them with the paperwork upstairs. He cannot talk his way out of a signed will. Brielle glared at me. She glared at Whitaker. Fine, she spat. Come upstairs. But if he says one word during the reading, I will have him arrested for unauthorized practice of law. She spun on her heel and marched toward the elevators, her heels clicking angrily on the marble. Rourke followed, sparing me one last, warning glance. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. My knees felt weak. I looked down at Whitaker. He was calmly folding his handkerchief. You were amazing, I whispered. He looked up at me and winked. I told you, Lucy, he said. They judge the book by the cover, but they forget that the cover is just paper. The story is on the inside. He gestured to the elevators. After you, my dear, let us go see what other lies they have prepared for us. The elevator ride to the 30th floor was a masterclass in suffocating silence. The stainless steel doors reflected our distorted images back at us. Brielle, pristine and rigid. Calder Rourke, checking his watch with practiced indifference. Me, with my wet shoes squelching softly every time I shifted my weight. And Elias Whitaker, sitting in his wheelchair with his eyes closed, looking for all the world like he was napping. But I knew he was not sleeping. His hands were folded over the handle of a battered leather briefcase that sat on his lap, his fingers tapping a silent, rhythmic code against the worn material. When the doors slid open with a cheerful ding, we stepped into a reception area that made the lobby downstairs look like a waiting room at a bus station. This was the executive floor. The carpet was thick enough to swallow your ankles. The lighting was recessed and soft, designed to flatter the wealthy and calm the litigious. Brielle stepped out first, and immediately, her posture changed. In the lobby, she had been the aggressor, loud and imperious. Here, she shrank slightly, adopting a pose of weary professional suffering. She turned to me, holding a finger to her lips, though I had not said a word. Please, Lucy, she whispered. Her voice pitched perfectly to carry to the secretary sitting 20 feet away. Try to keep your voice down up here. These people are working on billion-dollar mergers. We cannot have you screaming like you did downstairs. I stared at her, my mouth opening in disbelief. I had barely spoken downstairs. She was the one who had screeched for security. She was painting a picture before we even entered the room, framing me as the volatile, unhinged sister who did not belong in civilized society. I am not screaming, I said, keeping my voice low. Brielle winced theatrically, as if my whisper was a physical blow. She glanced at the secretary, a young woman with glasses who was now watching us with concern, and gave a long, apologetic sigh. I know you are upset about the money, Lucy, but we have to be adults, Brielle said, loud enough for the witness to hear. Just take a deep breath. She was good. I had to give her that. She was terrifyingly good at twisting reality in real time. My hands curled into fists at my sides. The injustice of it burned in my throat like acid. I wanted to correct the record. I wanted to tell the secretary that my sister had just poured water on me. But then I felt the wheel of the chair bump gently against my calf. I looked down. Mr. Whitaker was looking up at me. He did not shake his head. He just blinked once, slowly. Let them talk. I swallowed the scream. I uncurled my fists. I stepped aside to let him roll past me onto the plush carpet. We are ready when you are, I said to Brielle, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. Brielle looked disappointed. She had wanted a scene. She had wanted me to cause a disturbance so she could justify barring me from the room. When I did not give it to her, she turned to Calder Rourke and nodded sharply. Calder stepped in. He placed a hand on my elbow, his grip firm, steering me away from Whitaker and toward a wall adorned with a massive, abstract oil painting that looked like a storm at sea. Miss Holmes, a word he said. It was not a request. He pulled me a few feet away, creating a physical separation between me and my witness. Listen to me closely, he said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. We are about to go into a room with senior partners. This is not the time for sentimentality. We have run a full financial audit of your father's estate. He paused to let the word audit hang in the air like a threat. We have the records. Lucy, we know you did not contribute a single cent to the household expenses in the last 6 months. No mortgage payments, no utility contributions, nothing. In the eyes of the law, that makes you a dependent, a guest. He leaned closer, his cologne smelling of expensive musk and intimidation. If you go in there and try to fight the will, we will present this evidence. We will paint a picture of a 34-year-old woman who failed to launch, who lived off her dying father's charity while her sister paid the bills. We will argue that you have already received your inheritance in the form of free rent and board. Do you really want that on public record? My heart hammered against my ribs. It was the exact fear I had confessed to Maya. Not the loss of money, but the loss of my narrative. The rewriting of my love into parasitism. I did not pay rent because I quit my job to be his nurse, I hissed, my voice trembling. I saved him thousands of dollars in care costs. Calder smirked. It was a small, pitying expression. Sweat equity does not show up on a bank ledger. Miss Holmes, courts look at numbers, and your number is 0. I felt the tears stinging my eyes again, not tears of sadness, but tears of impotence. He was using the sterile, cold logic of finance to erase the warm, messy reality of caretaking. My pocket buzzed. It was a sharp, insistent vibration against my hip. I pulled away from Calder's grip, stepping back to create space. Excuse me, I said. I pulled my phone out. It was a text from Maya. Sent to your secure backup email. Screen captures of the texts, plus a timeline I wrote up of every shift you missed at the studio to take him to chemo. I also found the receipt for the medical bed you rented with your credit card. You paid for that. Lucy, don't let them gaslight you. I stared at the screen. The medical bed. I had forgotten. It was $1,200. I had put it on my emergency card because the insurance approval was taking too long and Dad could not sleep lying flat. I looked up at Calder. The fear in my chest receded just a fraction, replaced by a cold clarity. I paid for the hospital bed. I said, $1,200. March 3rd. I have the receipt. Calder's smirk faltered for a microsecond. He blinked. A minor expense. He dismissed, waving his hand. Compared to the mortgage, it is not 0, I interrupted. You said my number was 0. It is not. Calder's eyes narrowed. He realized that the bullying tactic was hitting a wall. He decided to change approach. He stepped back and signaled to Brielle. She walked over, her face composed into a mask of sisterly concern. She reached into her purse and pulled out a checkbook. Lucy, look, she said, her voice soft, almost pleading. We do not want to destroy you. You are my sister. I know you are struggling. I know the restoration business is quaint, but not exactly lucrative. She opened the checkbook and uncapped a pen. I am willing to offer you a settlement, right now. Before we walk through those doors. She scribbled quickly and ripped the check out. She held it toward me. $20,000, she said. I looked at the piece of paper. $20,000. It was enough to clear my credit card debt. It was enough to rent a new apartment for a year. It was a lifeline. Take it, Brielle urged. Just sign the waiver of contest. You walk away with cash. You do not have to sit through the meeting. You do not have to hear us read the list of debts. You can go home. Calder nodded encouragingly. It is a generous offer, Miss Holmes. More than you are entitled to, legally speaking. For a second, I was tempted. I was so tired. My feet were wet. My head hurt. I just wanted to go back to my studio and sleep. But then I looked at the check again. In the memo line, Brielle had written compassionate gift. Gift. Not inheritance. Not share. Gift. If I took this check, I was accepting her version of the story. I was accepting that I was a charity case. I was accepting that my father had left me nothing but a burden for her to clean up. I looked over at Mr. Whitaker. He had not moved. He was watching the interaction with the intensity of a hawk. He did not signal me this time. He just waited to see who I was. I looked back at Brielle. If the estate is insolvent? I asked quietly, where is this money coming from? Brielle froze. You said Dad died in debt. I continued. You said there was no liquidity. So is this your money? Or is there money in the estate that you are not telling me about? Brielle's face hardened. The mask of concern slipped. Do not be stupid. Lucy, I am trying to help you. No, I said, you are trying to buy me. I did not take the check. I let it hang in the air between us. I am going into that meeting, I said, and I am going to hear the will. Brielle snatched the check back, crumpling it in her fist. Fine, she spat. Have it your way. Walk out with nothing. See if I care. She turned sharply and marched toward the large double mahogany doors at the end of the hall. Calder glared at me, adjusted his tie, and followed her. I walked over to Mr. Whitaker. My legs felt shaky, but my resolve was solid. They tried to buy me off. I whispered, $20,000. Cheap. Whitaker grunted. He looked at the doors. Then, he did something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. He placed the battered leather briefcase on his lap. He reached for the brass latches. They were tarnished, contrasting with the sleek modern surroundings. Click, click. The sound was loud in the quiet hallway. He lifted the lid just an inch. I peered down. Inside, the briefcase was lined with worn green velvet. There were no stacks of random papers, no disorganized mess. There was just a single, thick envelope made of heavy cream-colored linen paper. It was sealed with red wax and old-fashioned, almost archaic detail. And sitting on top of the envelope was a card. It was not paper, it was metal, brushed steel or titanium, etched with laser precision. It caught the overhead light and flared with a cold, silver brilliance. I could not read the text on it from this angle. But it looked heavy. It looked official. It looked like a badge of authority. Brielle had stopped at the door. She turned around to glare at us, impatient. Are you coming? Or her words died in her throat. She was looking at the briefcase. From where she stood, she could see the glint of the metal card. She could see the red wax seal. For the first time all morning, for the first time since I had seen her at the funeral, Brielle looked unsure. Her arrogance flickered. Her eyes widened slightly, darting from the briefcase to Whitaker's face. She recognized something. I saw a flash of memory in her eyes. Maybe she had seen that briefcase before, years ago. Maybe Dad had shown it to her. Or maybe she just instinctively recognized the visual language of power that exceeded her own. What is that? She asked, her voice losing its polished edge. Whitaker snapped the briefcase shut. Snap? Just my lunch. Mrs. Vaughn? Whitaker said innocently. Brielle stared at him for another second. Her brow furrowed. She looked like she wanted to ask another question. But Calder opened the door. Brielle, the partners are waiting, he said. She shook herself, casting one last suspicious look at the briefcase, and walked into the room. I stepped behind the wheelchair to push him in. Whitaker reached up. He grabbed my hand on the handle. His grip was surprisingly strong, his skin dry and cool like parchment paper. He pulled me down slightly, forcing me to lean in until my ear was inches from his lips. Lucy, he whispered. Yes, I breathed. The tension in his voice was palpable. This was the final instruction before battle. When we get inside, they are going to put a document on the table. They are going to say it is the last will and testament. He paused. Do not touch it. Do not pick it up. Do not read it. Why I whispered? Because, he said, his voice dropping to a murmur that was barely sound. If you acknowledge their copy, you validate their jurisdiction, leave it on the table. Leave it to me. I nodded, my heart pounding in my ears. "Okay," I said. "Open the door." "Lucy," he said, sitting back up and smoothing his tie. "It is showtime." I pushed the heavy mahogany door open. The air inside the conference room was 10 degrees colder than the hallway. A long table stretched out before us, surrounded by men in suits who stopped talking the moment we entered. At the head of the table sat a senior partner, and in front of him lay a pristine, leather-bound document. The trap was set. But as I pushed Elias Whitaker across the threshold, feeling the weight of the mysterious metal card in his briefcase, I had the distinct feeling that the trap was not for me. The conference room on the 30th floor was not designed for conversation. It was designed for capitulation. The space was vast, dominated by a table that seemed to stretch for miles, cut from a single slab of dark, polished walnut that gleamed under the cold, recessed lighting. The air was frigid, aggressively filtered, and smelled faintly of lemon polish and expensive cologne. One entire wall was floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a panoramic view of the city below. From this height, the construction site where I had ruined my shoes looked like a trivial scar on the landscape, and the people walking on the streets were invisible specks. It was a view that made you feel like a god, detached from the messy, muddy reality of the world beneath. I sat in the chair Calder Rourke had pulled out for me. It was leather, high-backed, and swallowed me whole. I felt like a child sitting at the adults' table. My wet feet were tucked underneath me, hidden in the shadows, but the dampness was a constant, chilling reminder of where I stood in the hierarchy of this room. Brielle sat opposite me. She did not look at me. She was busy arranging her notepad, her phone, and her pen in a perfect geometric alignment. She looked like a general preparing to accept a surrender. Calder stood at the head of the table. He did not sit. He paced slowly, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. There were 2 other lawyers in the room, junior associates who sat silently against the wall, tapping on laptops, recording every breath we took. Mr. Whitaker had parked his wheelchair at the far corner of the table, slightly behind me. He had not spoken since we entered. He sat with his hands folded over his briefcase, his eyes half closed, resembling a statue more than a participant. To Calder and Brielle, he was clearly invisible, a nuisance they had decided to tolerate until the ink was dry. "Let us begin," Calder said, his voice echoing slightly in the acoustic perfection of the room. He opened the leather-bound folder on the table. "We are here to execute the estate of Arthur Holmes. As you know, the estate has faced significant liquidity challenges in the final months of Mr. Holmes's life. However, after a thorough review of the assets and liabilities, we have structured a distribution plan that prevents total insolvency." He slid a document toward me. It was thick, stapled on blue paper. "This is the last will and testament of Arthur Holmes, dated 6 months ago, immediately following his diagnosis," Calder stated. I looked at the document. I saw my father's signature at the bottom of the first page. It looked shaky, weak, the signature of a man who was scared and in pain. Calder cleared his throat and began to read. He did not read the whole thing, just the summaries. The blows came rhythmically, like lashes. "To my daughter, Brielle Vaughn, I bequeath the primary residence in Charleston, including all furnishings, library collections, and personal effects therein." I flinched. The library. The books were the only thing I had asked for. Dad and I had spent thousands of hours in that library. "To my daughter, Brielle Vaughn, I bequeath the entirety of my investment portfolio, including the bond accounts and the remnant of the retirement savings, to be used at her discretion to settle the outstanding medical debts of the estate. To my daughter, Brielle Vaughn, I grant the power of attorney over all digital assets, intellectual property, and residual claims." The list went on. The car, the small plot of land in the county, the antique watch collection, everything. I waited for my name. I waited to hear Lucy. Calder turned the page. He looked at me, his expression devoid of sympathy. "Regarding my daughter, Lucy Holmes, the will states the following: I acknowledge Lucy as my daughter. However, considering the substantial financial support provided to her in the form of housing and utility coverage during the final year of my life, and recognizing her lack of stable financial footing, I believe it is in her best interest that she not be burdened with the administration of complex assets. Therefore, I make no further provision for her in this document, trusting that her sister will manage the family legacy appropriately." The room went silent. The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Lack of stable financial footing, burdened. It was a legal eviction from my own family. I looked at the paper. I felt a wave of nausea. This did not sound like my father. My father was a man who wrote poetry in the margins of history books. He was a man who valued kindness over stability. This language was sterile. It was corporate. It sounded like Betrayal. I looked up at her. She was watching me now, a small, tight smile playing on her lips. She was enjoying this. She was enjoying watching the hope drain out of my face. Calder slid another document across the table. It was a single sheet of paper. "Because your sister is generous," Calder said, his tone suggesting he found such generosity wasteful. "She has authorized a compassionate disbursement." He pointed to a line at the bottom of the page. "If you sign this waiver, contesting any claim to the estate and agreeing to vacate the property within 48 hours, the estate will cut you a check for $5,000. $5,000, I repeated. My voice sounded hollow. "It is a clean break fee," Calder said smoothly. "It is enough to help you find a new apartment. Perhaps a studio that is actually zoned for residential living, so you do not have to sleep on a concrete floor." Brielle let out a soft laugh. "It is more than fair. Lucy," she said, "honestly, with your credit score, 5,000 is a windfall. You can buy a lot of, what is it you use, sawdust old rags. You can finally fix up some of those garbage chairs you drag in from the street." Her cruelty was precise. She knew exactly where to hit. She was not just taking the money, she was dismantling my identity. She was reinforcing the narrative that I was a failure, a scavenger who played with trash while she built empires. I looked at the waiver. The bold letters at the top read, "Full release of claims and indemnification." If I signed this, I was admitting they were right. I was admitting I was a leech. But if I did not sign it, I walked away with nothing, no money, no home, no legal standing. I would be fighting a law firm with empty pockets. I reached out and touched the paper. My hand was trembling uncontrollably. "Wait," I said. I pulled my hand back. I remembered the bank statement. I remembered the note. "What about the trust?" I asked. Calder paused. He frowned, a flicker of genuine annoyance crossing his face. "What trust? Ashford Trust Services," I said, my voice gaining a little strength. "I saw the bank statements. Dad paid a monthly fee to a trust account managed by this firm, $250 a month, for 5 years. That is $15,000 in fees alone. You do not pay fees on an empty box." I looked directly at Calder. "Where is that account? Why is it not listed in the assets?" Calder sighed. He looked at Brielle, then back at me, shaking his head as if he were explaining quantum physics to a toddler. "Miss Holmes, you are confused. That was a standard administrative retainer. Your father wanted to explore the option of a trust years ago. He paid a retainer to keep the file open, but he never funded it. There is no trust. Just a billing code for a service he never utilized. But he paid it until last month." I argued. "Why would he pay for an empty file while he was drowning in medical debt?" "Because he was old and confused." Brielle snapped, slamming her hand on the table. The sound cracked like a gunshot. She leaned forward, her eyes blazing. He was on morphine. "Lucy, he did not know what he was paying. He probably forgot to cancel the auto-pay. That is just another example of how poorly you monitored him. If you had been paying attention instead of playing nurse, maybe you would have saved him that money. But no, you let him bleed cash. And now you want to blame us." She pointed at the waiver. "Sign the paper. Lucy, stop embarrassing yourself. There is no secret treasure. There is just debt and your own incompetence." Calder uncapped a heavy, expensive fountain pen. He set it down on top of the waiver. "The offer expires when you leave this room," he said coldly. "Sign it, take the 5,000, and start over, or walk out and get nothing." I looked at the pen. It was black with gold trim. It looked heavy. I looked at Mr. Whitaker. He was still sitting there, silent. He was looking at the window, watching the clouds. He seemed completely checked out. Had he fallen asleep? Had I made a mistake trusting a stranger I met in a construction zone? I felt a crushing weight of defeat. Brielle was right. I had no money. I had no lawyer. I had a picture of a text message on my phone. But what good was a text message against a signed will? I reached for the pen. My fingers wrapped around the cold barrel. It felt like I was holding a live wire. I am sorry. Dad, I whispered to myself. I moved the pen toward the signature line. The tip hovered over the paper. Stop. The word was not loud. It was not shouted. It was spoken with the absolute, terrifying calm of a judge delivering a death sentence. I froze. Calder looked up, startled. Brielle whipped her head around. Mr. Whitaker had opened his eyes. He was looking directly at Calder Rourke. I beg your pardon, Calder said, his voice dripping with condescension. I said stop, Whitaker repeated. He did not raise his voice. He simply stated it as a fact of the universe. Do not sign that document. Lucy, Brielle stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. This is enough, she yelled. I told you this would happen. He is senile. Get him out of here. She turned to the junior associates. Call security. Now. Calder slammed his hand on the table. Who do you think you are? Calder demanded, glaring at Whitaker. You have no standing here. You are a trespasser. If you say one more word, I will have you charged with obstruction. Whitaker ignored him. He ignored Brielle. He ignored the junior associate who was reaching for the phone. He moved his hands to the briefcase on his lap. Click, click. The sound of the latches opening was the only sound in the room. Calder Rourke, Whitaker said, his voice gaining a sudden, resonant depth. You claim that document on the table is the last will and testament of Arthur Holmes. It is, Calder snapped, it is notarized and filed. And you claim, Whitaker continued, lifting the lid of the briefcase, that the trust account was empty, that it was merely a billing error. It was, Calder said. Though his eyes were fixed on the briefcase now, Whitaker reached inside. He pulled out the thick, cream-colored envelope with the red wax seal. He held it up. The red wax caught the light, looking like a drop of fresh blood. He placed it gently on the center of the polished walnut table. It landed with a soft, heavy thud that seemed to shake the room. Then he reached into the briefcase again and pulled out the metal card I had seen earlier. He slid it across the table. It spun on the polished surface, making a distinct whirring sound before coming to a stop directly in front of Calder. Calder looked down at the card. I watched the color drain from his face. It was not a gradual fade. It was instant. He went from flushed arrogance to a sickly, ash-gray pallor in the span of a single heartbeat. What? What is this? Calder stammered. His voice had lost all its bass. Read it, Whitaker commanded. Calder picked up the metal card. His hands were shaking. Ashford Klein. Level 5, Custodial Authority, Elias Whitaker. Senior Auditor. Retired. Brielle looked at Calder, panic starting to dawn in her eyes. Calder, what is going on? Who is he? Calder dropped the card as if it had burned him. He looked at Whitaker with wide, terrified eyes. You are, Whitaker, Calder whispered. The Whitaker, Mr. Whitaker wheeled his chair forward, moving out of the shadows and into the light. The document you just read, Whitaker said, pointing a finger at the blue stapled papers Calder had presented, is a forgery of intent. It is a draft. It is a convenient fiction. He tapped the sealed envelope on the table. This, Whitaker said, his voice hard as iron, is the deposited instrument. I personally oversaw the intake 5 years ago, and I personally monitored the monthly premiums that ensured its devastating validity. He looked at Brielle, who was now trembling, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. You said the version they held was the last will, Mrs. Vaughn. Whitaker said cold. He leaned forward, his blue eyes blazing with a righteous, terrifying fire. But the version you hold is not the one on deposit. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the kind of silence that usually follows a bomb blast, where the air itself feels sucked out of existence, leaving only a ringing void. Calder Rourke was staring at the metal card on the table as if it were radioactive. His hand, which had been reaching for the fraudulent will just moments ago, was now hovering in midair, trembling visibly. He looked pale, the blood draining from his face so fast it left his skin a sickly, waxen gray. Brielle was the first to break the paralysis. She looked from the card to Calder, then to Whitaker, her expression shifting from arrogance to a confused, terrified panic. She did not understand the significance of the card, but she understood fear, and she saw it written all over her high-priced lawyer's face. "What is it?" Brielle demanded, her voice shrill and cracking. "Calder, why are you looking at him like that? He is just a crazy old man. Throw him out." Calder slowly lifted his head. He looked at Brielle with eyes that were wide with shock. "Be quiet." "Brielle," he whispered. "Excuse me," Brielle gasped, recoiling as if he had slapped her. "I said be quiet," Calder hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and rage. "Do you have any idea who this is?" He pointed a shaking finger at Elias Whitaker. "This is not a beggar. Brielle. This is the former chief auditor for the Southeastern District of Trust Oversight. He wrote the manual on fiduciary responsibility that we study in law school." Brielle's mouth fell open. She looked at Mr. Whitaker, really looked at him, for the first time. She looked at his frayed jacket, his scuffed shoes, and the wheelchair. But now, instead of poverty, she saw something else. She saw a disguise. She saw a trap she had walked into with her eyes wide open. Mr. Whitaker ignored their exchange. He was focused entirely on the task at hand. He reached into his briefcase again and pulled out a small, silver letter opener. With a swift, precise movement, he sliced through the red wax seal on the cream-colored envelope. The sound of the thick paper tearing was sharp and loud, like a bone snapping. He pulled out a document. It was not bound in leather. It was simple, heavy archival paper, stamped with a series of complex blue ink codes along the margin. "This," Whitaker announced, placing the document in the center of the table, "is the original instrument. It was deposited into the custodial vault of Ashford Trust Services exactly 5 years ago. It carries the repository code Alpha 9 Zulu 4. He looked at Calder. "You can verify that code in your internal system, Mr. Rourke, although I suspect you already know what you will find." Calder swallowed hard. He reached for his laptop, his fingers flying across the keys. I could see the sweat beading on his forehead. He hit enter. He stared at the screen. His shoulders slumped. "It is there," Calder murmured. "Defeated. The file is locked. Access restricted to Level 5 personnel." Whitaker nodded slowly. "Exactly. And since you are only a Level 3 partner, Mr. Rourke, you could not see it. You assumed the account was empty because you did not have the clearance to see the contents. A classic error of arrogance." Whitaker pushed the document toward the center of the table. "Now, let us look at the signatures." He pointed to the bottom of the page. My father's signature was there, bold and strong, dated 5 years ago. Next to it was a notary stamp, and below that, a second signature. Elias Whitaker, custodial witness. Brielle stood up, her hands slamming onto the table. "This is ridiculous," she shouted. Dad changed his mind. "That will is 5 years old. The one Calder has is from 6 months ago. The new one supersedes the old one." Whitaker looked up at her. His expression was one of profound disappointment. "Under normal circumstances, you would be correct. Mrs. Vaughn," Whitaker said calmly, "a newer will typically revoke a prior one. However, there is a procedural problem with the document Mr. Rourke presented." He gestured to the blue stapled papers Calder had tried to force me to accept. "Mr. Rourke, please read the attestation clause on your version. Specifically, the section regarding the testator's capacity." Calder hesitated. He looked like he wanted to vomit. "Read it," Whitaker commanded. Calder picked up the fake will. Being of sound mind and body, he mumbled. Whitaker cut him off. "Stop. Look at the date. January 15th of this year." I gasped. "January 15th. Dad was in a coma on January 15th. I said, my voice rising. He had the seizure on the 14th. He did not wake up for 3 days. Whitaker nodded at me. Correct. He turned his gaze back to Calder, his eyes hard as flint. You have presented a document signed by a man who was medically incapacitated on the date of execution. Whitaker said, That is not a will. Mr. Rourke, that is fraud. And since you notarized it yourself, it is a felony. Calder dropped the paper. It fluttered to the table like a dead bird. I relied on the family's statement regarding his health. Calder stammered, backing away from the table. Mrs. Vaughn told me he was lucid. You are the lawyer, Whitaker barked, his voice booming in the room. Due diligence is your job, not hers. Brielle looked from Calder to Whitaker, her face draining of color. She was losing control of the narrative, and she knew it. She tried to pivot, to find a new angle of attack. Fine, she shrieked. Maybe the dates are wrong, but the intent was clear. He wanted me to have the house. Lucy is a leech. She is unstable. Whitaker smiled. It was a cold, dangerous smile. Ah, the character argument. I was hoping you would bring that up. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out his smartphone. It was an old model, but it worked. He tapped the screen and set it on the table. You claimed earlier, in the lobby, that I was a beggar harassing you. You claimed your sister was causing a scene. You attempted to use security forces to remove a lawful witness from the premises. He pressed play. The audio was crystal clear. The acoustics of the marble lobby had captured everything. Look at you. Did you crawl here through the sewers? Did you bring a prop? He looks like a beggar. Get rid of him. And then, the sound of water splashing. Oops. My hand slipped. The recording played on, capturing every cruel word, every sneering laugh, every lie Brielle had told the security guard. Whitaker stopped the recording. Brielle was trembling. She sank back into her chair, her hands covering her mouth. That was out of context, she whispered. Context? Whitaker asked. The context? Mrs. Vaughn. Is that you poured water on the shoes of a disabled man and your own sister, and then filed a false report with security to have us removed. He opened the original will to page 4. Let me read you Article 7, Section C, the Morality Clause. He adjusted his glasses. If any beneficiary acts with malice, fraud, or undue coercion toward another beneficiary, or attempts to manipulate the administration of this estate through deceit, their right to inherit shall be immediately suspended pending a tribunal review. He looked up over his glasses. Malice, fraud, coercion. He pointed to the check Brielle had crumpled in her hand earlier, or the checkbook she still had on the table. You offered your sister $20,000 to sign a waiver. You called it a gift, but in the context of this meeting, with a fraudulent will on the table, that is not a gift. That is a bribe. That is coercion. You were attempting to purchase her silence to cover up a crime. Calder Rourke wiped his face with a handkerchief. He was sweating profusely now. He knew exactly what this meant. If this went to the Bar Association, he would be disbarred. If it went to the district attorney, he would go to prison. Mrs. Vaughn, Calder said, his voice weak. We need to recess. I need to consult with my partners. No, Whitaker said. You do not get to recess. We are not done. He turned to me. Lucy, he said gently, do you remember the note your father left? I nodded, tears streaming down my face. If Brielle is cruel, find Whitaker. Your father knew. Whitaker said, he came to me 5 years ago because he saw the way Brielle treated you even then. He saw the greed. He saw the contempt. He knew that if he left a standard will, she would find a way to cheat you. She would hire a man like Rourke to bully you. He looked at Brielle with pure disdain. He predicted every single move you made today. Mrs. Vaughn. He knew you would try to evict Lucy. He knew you would try to hide the assets. He knew you would try to break her spirit. That is why he created the trust. Whitaker continued. He moved the bulk of his assets, the insurance payouts, the family land rights, the book royalties into a custodial account that you could not touch. He left the checking account empty to test you. He wanted to see if you would pay his debts out of love, or if you would declare insolvency to save a few dollars. You failed the test. Whitaker said softly. You failed it spectacularly. Brielle was crying now. But it was not the crying of remorse. It was the ugly, sobbing panic of a child who has been caught stealing. I did not know she wailed. I was just trying to be smart. I was trying to protect the family. You were protecting yourself. Whitaker corrected. He turned back to the document on the table. Under the terms of the morality clause, your behavior today, the fraud, the harassment in the lobby, the attempted coercion automatically triggers a suspension of your inheritance rights. He looked at Calder. Mr. Rourke, as the acting executor who presented a fraudulent document, you are hereby removed. I am asserting my authority as the designated custodial overseer to assume temporary control of this estate effective immediately. Calder nodded quickly, too terrified to argue. Yes, of course. I withdraw. I withdraw completely. Whitaker looked at me. Lucy, he said, the house is not insolvent. The debts are covered by the insurance policy your father locked in the trust. You do not have to leave. You do not have to sign anything. I felt a sob break loose from my chest. I covered my face with my hands. The relief was physically painful. I was not crazy. I was not a leech. I was safe. But Whitaker was not finished. He closed the folder, but he kept one hand on the latch of his briefcase. There is one more thing, he said. The room went quiet again. Even Brielle stopped sobbing to listen. Your father was a history teacher, Whitaker said. He believed in lessons, and he believed that some lessons need to be final. He tapped the metal card on the table. We have established that the will Mr. Rourke presented is fake. We have established that the morality clause has been violated. But we have not yet discussed the disposition of the assets under these new conditions. He looked at Brielle, his eyes cold and hard. You think you have lost the house, Mrs. Vaughn? You think you have lost the money, but you are assuming that the punishment ends with disinheritance. He slowly opened the briefcase one last time. He pulled out a smaller, black envelope. It was sealed with black wax. He held it up. Your father called this the annex. Whitaker said, it is a conditional codicil that only activates if the primary beneficiary Brielle is proven to have committed fraud against the estate. He placed the black envelope on the table. You have not seen this yet, Whitaker said ominously. And I promise you, once I open this, your life as you know it is going to change forever. He looked at me. Lucy, are you ready to see what your father really thought of his successful daughter? I looked at the black envelope. I looked at Brielle, who was staring at it with the eyes of a condemned prisoner looking at the guillotine. Yes, I whispered. Whitaker slid his finger under the black wax. Then let us finish this, he said. The sound of the black wax snapping was louder than the air conditioning system. It was a crisp, dry crack that signaled the end of the secret my father had kept for 5 years. Mr. Whitaker unfolded the document inside the black envelope with the reverence of a priest handling a holy text. The paper was different from the others. It was gray, heavy, and woven with a visible watermark of a scales of justice. This is the conditional codicil to the trust, Whitaker said, smoothing the paper onto the table. He looked at Brielle, who was sitting very still, her face pale and damp with sweat. She looked like a gambler who had just bet the deed to her house on a pair of twos. Your father was a practical man, Whitaker continued, his voice steady and devoid of mockery. He knew that money changes people. He knew that the promise of wealth often strips away the veneer of civility. So he attached a condition to the disbursement of the primary trust fund. He turned the document so we could all see the bold text in the center. I will read the clause aloud. Whitaker said, the assets held within the Ashford Custodial Trust shall only be released to the primary beneficiary, Brielle Vaughn, provided that during the 30-day period immediately following my death and funeral, said beneficiary demonstrates conduct consistent with the values of family unity, compassion, and basic human dignity toward her co-beneficiaries. The room went so quiet, I could hear the hum of the hard drive in Calder's laptop. Whitaker looked up over his glasses. Compassion, family unity, human dignity. He let the words hang there, heavy and accusatory. The clause continues. Whitaker read, specific grounds for immediate disqualification include, but are not limited to the eviction of a sibling from the family home prior to probate, the falsification of estate debts to induce panic, and the use of legal intimidation to coerce a waiver of rights. I gasped. I put my hand over my mouth. It was as if Dad had been standing in the hallway yesterday, watching Brielle throw my suitcase into the rain. He had listed the exact sins she would commit. He knew her better than she knew herself. Brielle let out a strangled sound. It was half a laugh, half a sob. That is subjective, she stammered, her voice high and thin. You cannot define dignity legally. That clause is unenforceable. Whitaker smiled. It was not a nice smile. On the contrary, Mrs. Vaughn, the definition is quite rigorous, and the enforcement is binary. You either pass or you fail. He pointed to the recording device he had placed on the table earlier. You evicted your sister less than 2 hours after the funeral. You poured water on her in a public lobby. You called security to remove a disabled witness. You attempted to bribe her with $20,000 to sign a fraudulent waiver. He leaned forward. You did not just fail the test, Brielle. You failed it with a level of malice that is frankly impressive. Brielle looked at Calder. Do something, she shrieked. Tell him it is not legal. Calder did not look at her. He was staring at the gray paper on the table, reading the fine print. He knew it was legal. He knew that trust law allowed for almost any condition a grantor wanted to set, as long as it was not criminal. It is a behavior-based conditional trust, Calder murmured, his voice defeated. It is ironclad. If the condition is not met, the beneficiary is bypassed. Bypassed, Brielle whispered. Whitaker nodded. If the primary beneficiary fails the dignity test, the assets do not dissolve, they transfer. He turned the page. In the event of disqualification, the entirety of the trust shall pass immediately to the secondary beneficiary, Lucy Holmes. I stared at the paper. The letters swam before my eyes. The entirety, all of it, I whispered. The house. The investments. Everything. Whitaker said softly, Your father wanted to give Brielle a chance to do the right thing, but he ensured that if she chose to be cruel, her cruelty would cost her everything she tried to hoard. Brielle stood up. Her chair fell backward with a loud crash. No, she screamed. That is my money. I earned it. I was the one who was successful. She is just a failure who sat by his bed. Sit down, Mrs. Vaughn, Whitaker commanded. I will not sit down. You are stealing from me. We are not done, Whitaker said, his voice cutting through her hysteria like a blade. We have discussed the will. We have discussed the trust. Now we need to discuss the debts. He reached into his briefcase again. This time, he pulled out a stack of papers that looked familiar. They were copies of the invoices Brielle had thrown at me yesterday. The funeral home bill, the hospital transport bill, the specialist fees. You told Lucy the estate was insolvent. Whitaker said, You showed her these invoices totaling over $100,000 in immediate liabilities. You used these numbers to terrify her into signing the waiver. He picked up the top invoice. It was the bill from St. Jude's Medical Center for respiratory therapy. $4,000. I looked into the billing codes on these documents. Whitaker said, Do you know what I found? Mr. Rourke Calder did not answer. He was wiping sweat from his upper lip with a shaking hand. I found that the billing codes do not match the service descriptions, Whitaker said. For example, the code listed here for respiratory therapy is actually the internal code for a cafeteria charge, and the patient ID number. It belongs to a deceased woman who died 3 years ago. He tossed the paper onto the table. He picked up the funeral home bill, and this one, $8,000 for a mahogany casket upgrade. I called the funeral home this morning while Lucy was getting coffee. They have no record of an upgrade. They billed the standard package, which was paid in full by your father's pre-need insurance policy. He looked at Brielle. You forged these, he stated. You took old templates, changed the numbers, and printed them out on high-quality paper. You created a mountain of fake debt to convince your sister that the estate was worthless, so she would hand it over to you for free. Brielle's face was a mask of terror. She shook her head frantically. I did not. It was an administrative error. My assistant must have mixed up the files. Whitaker turned to Calder. And you, Mr. Rourke, you authenticated these debts. You included them in the insolvency report. I relied on the client's data, Calder said quickly, his voice cracking. I cannot verify every single receipt. Stop lying, Whitaker snapped. He pulled a single sheet of paper from his pocket. This is a transaction log from the firm's internal document creation system. I still have friends in IT. Mr. Rourke, this log shows that these invoices were created yesterday afternoon, not by Brielle's assistant, by you, from your user terminal. Calder went silent. He looked like a man who had just felt the trapdoor open beneath his feet. This is not just family drama anymore, Whitaker said grimly. This is wire fraud. This is forgery. This is a conspiracy to defraud an heir. He looked at the two junior associates who were still typing in the corner. I hope you are writing this down, he told them, because you are going to be witnesses in a federal investigation. The room felt incredibly small. The air pressure seemed to drop. Brielle looked at the documents spread across the table, the real will, the morality clause, the fake invoices. The evidence of her greed was laid out in a perfect, damning mosaic. She slumped. The fight seemed to go out of her. Her shoulders dropped, and her face crumpled. She began to cry. But it was not the angry crying of before. It was a soft, pitiful weeping. She looked at me, her eyes wide and wet, filled with a sudden, desperate warmth. Lucy, she choked out. Lucy, please. She reached across the table, her hand trembling. I am so sorry. I was so scared. You know how much pressure I am under at work. The market is crashing. I have debts too. I did not mean to hurt you. I just panicked. She looked at me with that pleading expression she used to use when we were kids, and she wanted to borrow my clothes. Please, Lucy, do not let him report this. We are sisters. We are family. Dad would not want us to go to jail. She wiped her nose with a tissue, sniffing loudly. Look, you can have the house. I do not want it, but let me manage the trust for you. You know you are not good with money. You are an artist. You do not understand investments. I can help you. We can fix this. Just tell him to stop. Tell him we will handle it internally. I watched her. I watched the tears slide down her cheeks. I watched the way her hand reached for mine, trying to establish a connection she had severed yesterday. 10 minutes ago, she had called me a failure. Yesterday, she had thrown my clothes into the rain. Now, she wanted to manage my money. She wanted to save herself by pretending to save me. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was the death of the last piece of hope I had held for her. I had wanted a sister. I had wanted her to love me. But looking at her now, I realized she did not know how to love anything that she could not control. I stood up. My legs were steady. My wet shoes squished against the carpet, but I did not care. I looked down at her. You threw me out, I said quietly. Lucy, you threw me out in the rain. I repeated. You packed my life into a suitcase like it was garbage. You told me I was a leech because I held Dad's hand while he died. I leaned over the table. You do not get to use Dad's name to save yourself. Brielle. You forfeited the right to speak for him when you tried to erase his memory with a fake will. Lucy. Please, she sobbed. I am your sister. I looked her in the eye. You only remember I am your sister when you are about to lose everything. I said. The room went silent. Brielle recoiled as if I had hit her. The truth of it hung in the air. Cold and undeniable. I turned to Mr. Whitaker. Do what you have to do, I said. Whitaker nodded solemnly. He reached for his phone. I am filing a formal report with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network regarding the fraudulent invoices, he announced, his voice formal and precise, and I am filing an immediate complaint with the State Bar Association regarding Mr. Rourke's conduct. Calder let out a whimper. He sank into his chair, burying his face in his hands. No. Wait, Brielle shouted. She stood up again, her face undergoing another transformation. The sorrow vanished. The pleading vanished. In its place was a look of pure, feral hatred. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "You set me up," she screamed. She looked wild, her hair coming loose from its perfect style. "This is a scam, you and this old man. You planned this." She turned to the junior associates. "Do not write that down. Write this down. She found him on the street. I saw them. She was cleaning mud off him in the lobby. They are working together." She looked at Calder, shaking his shoulder violently. "Calder, wake up. Do not you see? They forged the documents in that briefcase. That is not Dad's signature. That is a forgery. Lucy is an artist. She knows how to copy handwriting. She forged the moral clause because she knew I would kick her out. She was grasping at straws, flailing in the deep end of her own lies. But she was loud, and she was desperate. I demand a hold on everything," Brielle yelled, slamming her hand on the table. "You cannot transfer the assets based on papers pulled out of a magic briefcase by a stranger. I demand a forensic validation." She looked at Whitaker with eyes full of venom. "You say you are an auditor. Prove it. I want a formal hearing. Right now. I want the managing partners of this firm in this room. I want the original repository logs from the server room, not just a printout you brought in your pocket." She turned to me, a sneer twisting her face. "You think you won, Lucy. You think you can steal my inheritance with a sob story and a fake auditor? I will drag this out for years. I will freeze every cent. You will starve in that studio before you see a dime." Whitaker looked at her calm. He did not seem rattled by her accusation. "You want a formal validation?" he asked. "Yes," Brielle hissed. "I want the managing partner. I want the head of the trust division. I want them to look at that metal card and tell me it is real, because I think it is a prop. I think you are a fraud." Whitaker closed his briefcase. "Snap. Very well," he said. He looked at the clock on the wall. "It is 10 o'clock. The managing partner, Mr. Ashford, is usually in his office on the 45th floor on Tuesdays." He turned his wheelchair toward the door. "Let us go upstairs. Mrs. Vaughn, you want the highest authority? Let us go get him. But I warn you, when you ask for the final judgment, you cannot take it back." Brielle glared at him, her chest heaving. "I am not afraid of you." She spat. "Call the partners. Let us finish this." She walked to the door and yanked it open. I looked at Whitaker. He gave me a small, imperceptible nod. We followed her out. The hallway felt longer this time. We were not just leaving a meeting. We were walking toward an execution. Brielle thought she was calling a bluff. She did not realize she was summoning the firing squad. The elevator ride to the 45th floor felt less like an ascent and more like a transcendence. We left the bustling, terrified atmosphere of the 30th floor and rose to the very peak of the Ashford and Klein Tower. When the doors slid open, there was no reception desk, no waiting area, and no noise. There was only a single, massive set of double doors made of frosted glass and iron, guarded by a silence so profound it felt heavy. This was the office of Reginald Ashford, the founding partner, a man whose name was etched into the bedrock of Charleston's legal history. Brielle marched toward the doors, her chin high, her desperation hardening into a brittle, frantic energy. She believed, truly believed, that she could talk her way out of this. She believed that authority respected money more than it respected truth. She was about to learn that there is a level of authority that respects only order. We entered the office. It was a cavernous space lined with books that looked like they had not been touched in a century. Sitting behind a desk the size of a small boat was Reginald Ashford. He was a man in his 80s, with skin like crumpled parchment and eyes that were terrifyingly alert. Calder Rourke entered behind us, looking like a man walking to the gallows. He knew who he was facing. Brielle, however, went on the offensive immediately. "Mr. Ashford," she began, her voice echoing in the room, "I am Brielle Vaughn. I am a premier client of this firm. I have been subjected to harassment, fraud, and intimidation by a former employee of yours and my unstable sister." Mr. Ashford did not stand up. He did not smile. He simply gestured to the chairs arranged before his desk. "Sit," he said. His voice was like grinding stones. We sat. I took the chair next to Mr. Whitaker. Brielle sat on the far side, putting as much distance between us as possible. Before Whitaker could speak, Brielle motioned to the door. "I have brought a witness," she announced triumphantly. "Someone who can attest to my sister's mental state." A man walked in. I recognized him instantly. It was Julian, a junior executive from Brielle's firm. He looked uncomfortable, clutching a briefcase, but he nodded dutifully at Brielle. "Tell them." "Julian," Brielle commanded. Julian cleared his throat. "I have known Mrs. Vaughn for 5 years," he said. His voice rehearsed. "And I have heard her speak often of her sister's struggles. Miss Holmes has a history of erratic behavior. Since the father's diagnosis, Mrs. Vaughn has expressed concern that her sister was becoming delusional, perhaps even hallucinating about the estate's value." Brielle nodded vigorously. "See," she said, turning to Ashford, "she is grief-stricken. She is not in her right mind. She found this old man on the street and convinced herself he is a savior. This entire scenario with the secret will is a fabrication of a broken mind. I demand you dismiss them and validate the document Calder prepared." Mr. Ashford looked at me. His gaze was unreadable. "Is this true? Miss Holmes?" he asked. "Are you hallucinating?" I opened my mouth to defend myself, to scream that I was the only sane person in the room. But the heavy oak doors behind us swung open with a bang that made everyone jump. "She is not hallucinating." A voice rang out, "But she is definitely angry." I turned around. It was Maya. She was still in her blue hospital scrubs, looking exhausted but fierce. She marched into the room, ignoring the protests of the executive assistant chasing her. "Who is this?" Calder demanded, finding his voice. "I am the witness who was actually there," Maya said, slamming a thick file folder onto Mr. Ashford's desk. She pointed at Julian. "He is a co-worker who hears water cooler gossip. I am the nurse who was in the house." Maya opened the folder. "Mrs. Vaughn claims her sister is unstable. She claims she acted out of love. But here are the text messages Mrs. Vaughn sent me 3 months ago." She slid a printed screenshot across the desk to Mr. Ashford. "February 12th. Maya read aloud. "The old man is fading fast. I have the paperwork ready to kick the sister to the curb the second the heart monitor flatlines." Maya pulled out another sheet. "And here is the call log from Mrs. Vaughn's phone, which she synced to the family cloud account she forgot my patient had access to. On the day of the funeral, 2 hours before the service, she had a 40-minute call with a real estate liquidation firm." Maya looked at Brielle, whose face had gone the color of spoiled milk. She was selling the house while Lucy was picking out the flowers for the grave. Maya said, "That is not concern for a mentally unstable sister. That is premeditated liquidation." Mr. Ashford picked up the screenshot. He adjusted his spectacles. He read it once, then twice. He looked at Brielle. "You discussed evicting your sister while your father was still alive," he asked. Brielle stammered. It was just venting. I was stressed. It does not prove anything about the will. It proves motive." Mr. Whitaker interrupted. Whitaker wheeled his chair forward. He placed the metal card and the original will on Mr. Ashford's desk. "Reginald," Whitaker said warmly, "it has been a long time." Mr. Ashford looked at the metal card. A flicker of recognition and genuine respect crossed his face. "Elias," Ashford said, "I thought you retired to Florida to fish." "I did," Whitaker said, "but Arthur Holmes was a friend, and he asked me to keep an eye on things. It seems he was right to worry." Whitaker pointed to the chain of evidence. "Mrs. Vaughn claims Lucy forged this document. She claims Lucy and I conspired together. But look at the repository seal." "Reginald." Ashford ran his thumb over the red wax and the blue ink codes. "This is a level 5 repository seal." Ashford stated, "It was stamped 5 years ago. I recognize the die cast. We destroyed this specific die mold 3 years ago when we updated our security protocols." He looked at Brielle. "Unless your sister has a time machine, Mrs. Vaughn. She could not have forged this seal. The physics of it are impossible." Brielle slumped in her chair. The hallucination narrative had collapsed under the weight of forensic reality, but the final nail was yet to be hammered. Mr. Ashford leaned back in his leather chair. He tented his fingers and looked at Brielle with the cold, analytical gaze of a man who had spent 60 years dissecting lies. "I have one question. Mrs. Vaughn," Ashford said. Brielle looked up, her eyes wide and terrified. "If you were the legitimate heir," Ashford began slowly, "and if you truly believed your sister was mentally unstable and needed help, why did you evict her from the safety of her home 24 hours before the legal meeting?" The room went silent. "Why did you throw her into the rain?" Ashford pressed. An innocent heir acting in good faith would have waited for the probate process. They would have ensured their sick sister was cared for. The only reason to evict her immediately is if you knew she had a claim, and you wanted to physically separate her from the evidence in that house. Brielle opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked at Julian, who looked away. She looked at Calder, who was staring at his shoes. She looked at me. She choked. She had no answer, because there was no answer that did not admit guilt. Ashford nodded. "That is what I thought," he said. He turned to Whitaker. "Elias, is the morality clause valid?" "It is," Whitaker confirmed. "It triggers upon any act of malice or coercion. The eviction serves as the primary trigger. The fraud with the invoices serves as the secondary. Then the ruling of this firm is clear," Ashford declared. He picked up the fake will Calder had drafted and dropped it into the wastebasket beside his desk. "The document presented by Mr. Rourke is hereby declared null and void due to lack of capacity and evident fraud. The original will deposited 5 years ago is recognized as the true last will and testament of Arthur Holmes." He turned to the gray document, the codicil. "Furthermore," Ashford continued, his voice hardening, "due to the proven violation of the morality clause, the primary beneficiary, Brielle Vaughn, is disqualified from the trust." He looked at me. "Miss Holmes, under the terms of the codicil, the entirety of the trust assets, including the property, the insurance liquidity, and the investment portfolio transfers immediately to you." "No!" Brielle screamed. She lunged forward, grabbing the edge of the desk. "You cannot do this. That is millions of dollars. You are stealing my life security," Ashford said calmly into his intercom. 2 guards entered the room. They were not the hesitant guards from the lobby. These were serious men. "Please escort Mrs. Vaughn from the building," Ashford said, "and revoke her client privileges. We do not represent individuals who defraud estates." "And Mr. Rourke?" Whitaker asked, gesturing to the sweating lawyer. Ashford looked at Calder Rourke with pure disgust. "Mr. Rourke, you will remain here," Ashford said. "We have to file a self-report with the State Bar Association immediately. You will be surrendering your license pending the investigation into the falsified invoices. Your career at this firm is over as of this moment." Calder let out a sob. He collapsed into his chair. A ruined man. Brielle was being pulled toward the door by the guards. She was fighting, kicking, her dignity completely gone. But then, she saw me. She stopped fighting. She planted her feet. "Lucy," she cried out. She shook off the guard's hand and ran toward me. She dropped to her knees right there on the expensive carpet. She grabbed my hand, her grip wet and desperate. "Lucy, please stop them," she begged. "I am your sister. We can share it. I will be good. I promise I will be good." She looked up at me, mascara running down her face, her eyes wild with panic. "You cannot let them ruin me. Lucy, I have debts. I leveraged everything on this inheritance. If I lose this, I lose my apartment in New York. I lose my status. I will have nothing." I looked down at her. I looked at the hand clutching mine, the same hand that had snatched my house keys yesterday. I remembered the rain. I remembered the way she had looked at me when she called me a leech. I did not feel anger anymore. I just felt a profound, exhausting sadness. I gently, but firmly, pulled my hand out of her grip. "You have nothing because you tried to take everything," I said softly. "Lucy, please," she wailed. "Give me a chance I can change." I stood up. I smoothed the wrinkles of my muddy dress. I am not going to sue you. Brielle, I said, I am not going to send you to jail. That is my gift to you. Her eyes lit up with a flicker of hope, but, I continued, my voice steady, I am not your savior, and I am not your victim anymore. I stepped back, putting distance between us. You do not have a sister to turn to, I said, because yesterday, you decided you did not want one. From now on, I do not have a home for you to come back to. I turned to the guards. Please take her out. No, Lucy. No. Her screams echoed down the hallway as the guards dragged her out. The heavy doors closed, cutting off the sound. The silence returned to the office. Mr. Ashford looked at me. He looked at my muddy shoes, my messy hair, and my tear-stained face. He stood up and extended his hand. My apologies for what you have endured. Miss Holmes, he said respectfully, your father was a good man. He would be proud of you today. I shook his hand. Thank you, I whispered. I turned to Whitaker. He was smiling, a genuine, warm smile that reached his blue eyes. We did it, he said softly. We did it. I agreed. I walked out of the office, pushing his wheelchair, with Maya walking beside us. We took the elevator down, leaving the high-stakes world of corporate law behind. When we stepped out onto the street, the rain had stopped. The sun was breaking through the clouds, steaming the pavement. The air still smelled of wet earth and exhaust. But to me, it smelled like freedom. I did not scream. I did not jump for joy. I just closed my eyes and let out a long, slow breath, expelling the fear, the grief, and the doubt that had lived in my lungs for 6 months. I felt light. I felt clean. Epilogue. 6 months later, the smell of sawdust is the best smell in the world. I stood in the center of the newly renovated Harbor Loom Restoration Studio. The concrete floors were polished. The skylights were clean, letting in floods of natural light. Around me, 5 apprentices were working. One was an old veteran who had lost his housing. Another was a single mother who needed a trade. They were sanding, varnishing, and bringing broken things back to life. I used the inheritance money, not for a sports car, not for a penthouse. I paid off the house, I secured the trust for the future, and then I expanded the business. I created a program for people who had been discarded, just like I had been. We took furniture that people threw out, the scratched, the wobbling, the worthless, and we made it beautiful again. I walked over to the front desk. There was a framed photo of my father there, and next to it, a photo of me, Maya, and Elias Whitaker, taken on the day we won. Elias comes by on Tuesdays to handle the books. He says he likes the smell of the varnish. I never heard from Brielle again. I heard she moved to the Midwest, trying to start over under a different name. I hope she finds peace, but she will have to find it without me. I picked up a piece of sandpaper and walked over to a chair that had a broken leg. It looked hopeless to the untrained eye, but I knew better. Nothing is ever truly broken until you give up on it. And as I started to sand away the rough edges, I realized that my father's final lesson was not about money at all. It was about value. He taught me that true wealth is not what you hoard in a bank account. True wealth is the people who stand by you in the mud when the rest of the world walks on by. Compassion does not make you poor. It just makes the villains reveal themselves sooner. And once they are gone, you are left with the only thing that matters, a life you can be proud of. Thank you so much for listening to this story of justice and redemption. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Are you listening on your commute, at work, or relaxing at home? Please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on Lucy's decision. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Helena Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so we can share this journey with even more people.